And it's honestly the same problems. People say,
Mm.
man, I'm stuck, and they don't know how to get unstuck, right? I am drowning in the day-to-day.
Matthew, thank you so much for joining me. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Maddie. I'm pumped to be here.
I'm really excited to talk because I think when we chatted briefly off air, your story is pretty incredible. So I'm looking forward to hearing it from you, and everybody else can get in on it. So do you want to maybe just start at the beginning?
Yeah, for sure. In terms of the story, you're looking for me to start from like the entrepreneurial or from the...
Yeah, let's start from before you started your company. Like, what were you doing before? What was your life like?
Yeah, great. So back in 2012, I was working for a company that was just a subsidiary of Xerox. And I loved my job. I was in a great spot. It was a 9 to 5 per se, but I basically spent most of my time kind of traveling across North America doing public speaking. It was
cool.
Yeah, it was honestly a great time, just networking. I was in my early 20s, so it felt like a bit of a dream job, right? Like going to different airports, different cities, hotels, the whole bit. And at the same time, I had helped a few friends start a church a few years earlier. So,
oh, really?
Yeah. So just
what kind of church?
Honestly,
it's really interesting.
Yeah, it honestly, life was great. I felt like things were really, really progressing with my career and life and family and friends. And then in 2012, I was driving home late one night from a girl I was dating at the time. She lived in the countryside. And so just to give the audience like a mental picture, it's late, it's in the countryside, it's pitch black outside, houses are spread apart. I was driving an SUV, and before I could even realize, 2 horses bigger than my SUV jumped out onto the road.
No.
Yeah. And listen, I didn't know anything about horses, but they were Clydesdales.
Oh, God, they're huge.
Yeah, which I found out later. So they jumped out of the road. I slammed on the brakes, and literally just destruction everywhere. Is the easiest way to say it. And when they measured, I basically was 3 inches from death. That's basically like my near-death life experience. And so I tell people I basically did what I think every young, dumb male does in his 20s, where he just pretends like he's invincible and life moves on. And so I went back to work, kept traveling.
Wait, you went back to work? Like, how soon after the accident you were back to work?
3 days.
Stop.
No, not like I had a severe concussion. I was in bed for 3 days. And then I even think I played volleyball on the 3rd day.
What?
Yeah, just like, again, this idea that I was like, okay, that sucked, but like life goes on, right? Like, I think I was 23. I'm like, I got things to do.
Like, yeah, I mean, at least you didn't have any like broken bones or anything. I mean,
no, right? Nothing visible. And so as time went on, as the days turned, to weeks and weeks to months, I started to really realize that something was wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it. Started to get chronic pain physically. I started to get these headaches where I would I'd hide out in washrooms or lie down on floors and close my office door for hours at a time. And I was like, what the heck is happening? And it got to a point where, depression hit, and I was like, I actually just can't do this. And so, again, being a little young and just naive to everything, I quit my job, and I was like, well, I got to figure something out here. And so I basically spent like a period where I felt like my life was falling apart. Like, I lived with my parents. I'm an extrovert. I hate to see people 6 or 7 days a week. And I was reduced to being in bed days on end, not seeing people, not working.
Because you were feeling sick?
Yeah. Like, these headaches would take me out from anywhere from 15 minutes to days.
Wow.
Yeah. Like, can't work, can't look at a screen, the whole bit. And like, I actually still struggle with a lot of those symptoms today, 12 years later,
Really?
even though, my journey has kind of come around quite a bit. And so, so that first year post-accident was really, really tough, but it paved the way for me to become an entrepreneur in a really weird way.
Were you like getting treatment at all? Like, were you going to see doctors being like, I have these crazy symptoms? Or were you just like, oh, whatever, it's just headaches?
In the beginning, it was just headaches, and it was just, a lot of that. But obviously, as things started to progress, I was like, nah, we need to figure this out. And I was not in tune at all with, mental health and any of that stuff. That just wasn't things that were phased in my background. And so for me, there was a lot of living in denial, a lot of like, hey, let's just push this down. Let's just keep going. And if I'm honest, a lot of like toxic culture that I was just doing to myself. So
I was going to ask about that because I was wondering if like that was something that you felt like looking back on it now, you felt existed even pre-accident, and it was just like the accident was just like the real turning point, like the bubbling point for you to start seeing this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Again, for sure. Like it just wasn't part of my upbringing, right? Like it's not how, I'm actually a first generation. My father's a refugee, my mother's an immigrant. And so like things like that weren't really talked about in our household. And so, as I started to go through this, it was like really confronting for my family because they could tell something was wrong and something was off. But like, why isn't Matt leaving the house? Why isn't he coming out of his room? Like, why is he just in bed at like 2 p.m. in the afternoon? And so it kind of brought to the surface, like you were saying, I think a lot of things that were kind of underlying, and in the coming like months and years, things that I really would have to kind of force myself to deal with.
What was that process like for you? Like coming to terms and dealing with it?
Yeah. So it's interesting. About a year out from the accident, I knew I'm not working. So I kind of felt like my whole life was it was this weird thing where I felt like my life was on pause, but also like I was going backwards. Like, I'm not working. I'm barely seeing people. It feels like all this like ambition and passion and potential that I had is just gone, wasted. I'm like, so is this like my life? And so I
can't imagine what that must have been like, because I know for me, like I've always been very driven and like very self-motivated. And I can't imagine waking up one day and just like not having that be part of my like personality or like any part of my day, like not having that experience anymore.
Totally. Maddie's same, right? Like I very much driven, ambitious, play tons of sports, or organized hangouts, parties, the whole bit. Like I just love starting things, being in the middle of things. And so now to come to this place where even when I had the desire to do that, even though I was losing a lot of that, even when I had the desire, I'm at the mercy of my head. I'm at the mercy of my body. And like, again, this idea that for the first time in my life, I'm sitting here, I'm like, I am not in control. Like
oh my gosh,
all your worst fears, all your worst everything. And so, yeah, about a year out, I said, look, I need to move out. And I'm going to try and make a way. I'm not making any money, but let's live off savings and figure it out. And so I think moving out was a catalyst, and starting my business was another catalyst that kind of really made me deal with a lot of the things that at this point I didn't even have clarity. Like I a year out did not even know what the symptoms were. I'm seeing doctors on the weekly. They don't know what's happening. Like it's a messed up situation.
I can't imagine that moment for you when you're going through all of this, like emotionally, mentally, physically. That what was the moment where you're like, I have this business idea and I really want to start it? Because it seems so not like counterintuitive, but it seems like you're going through all this stuff, and then it's like, when was the shift for you that was like, I have this great idea and I really want to pursue it?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I had, again, I'm sure you can relate. I had a billion different ideas that I could have done. But the one that I ended up going into was actually completely by accident, right? I had all these ideas, and one day a friend called me and he was like, hey, and I think he was just trying to throw me, a lifeline, a bone. And he had said, hey, I know you're good with computers. I'm working at this pool shop that was pretty prestigious. They built pools, custom pools. And he said, can you just stop by and maybe help out for a little bit? And I was like, yes, like anything. I need to make money.
Truly anything.
I need to get out of the house. So like, I'll shine your shoes. Like, I'll do whatever. So I went over there and started, met the owner. He had walked by out of his office, and I walked out of there that day with that company as a marketing client, which I didn't go to school for marketing. Didn't really know anything about marketing. I mean, I liked it. It was always intriguing, but he basically just kind of started opening up to me and presented that, he was struggling with this part of the business and grateful that I was coming in to help. And I said, well, I could help you. And he was like, really? How? And so I just, started saying some things that I knew. anyways, I ended up with a client. I took that money. I was like, okay, this is my shot. So I took that money, I invested it to teach myself some marketing, and that's how I started my business. And
Wait,
so,
this is crazy. I need to know everything about this conversation. Like you're sitting there, you're like, I'm here to help you with your computers, and suddenly he's like, what did he say that he was struggling with in terms of like marketing for their business?
yeah, so I'm sitting there, I'm working on the computer stuff, and one of the things that I've learned over like my kind of consulting journey, because I started consulting way too early, and I started using that term way too early. Everybody was like, "You don't have gray hair, and you're 20. What are you doing?" Um, and
Yeah.
so I learned pretty hard. I was like, "Yeah, I probably shouldn't use this word. Let's wait a little bit."
Yeah,
And
no, that's actually a really good point because I've talked to people who are like technically consultants that are very young, and my first question for them is always like, "How did you gain credibility to like call yourself a consultant?" Because I feel like that's the whole thing is that like you're consulting people based on your previous experience. So that makes sense.
Totally right. And in my mind, I was like, "Well, I'm like before." But once I started the company, I was like, "I'm consulting. Like I am offering advice and feedback." But you're right, right? Like, what credibility did I have?
Yeah.
And so in that first conversation when I'm there, I'm helping with some computer stuff, and he was like, "Oh, how's it going?" Just trying to get to know me, try to feel it out. And I had said, "Hey, here's some things I found or whatever, some things that I noticed were wrong.
Mm.
By the way, I would totally go down this road if I were you." And he basically looked at me and he was like, "Oh, like are you saying that you'll do it?" And I was like, "No, I actually just think you should look into this." And I think for him, it was this idea that I actually wasn't trying to sell him. I was
Yeah.
genuinely just trying to help him. I was like, No, I actually don't want more of your problems. Like, I don't even know if I can
Yeah.
do this. Right. Like, and so then it evolved in this conversation where he's like, we've been really trying to get into the world of, ranking on Google and social media. And I think Instagram had just come out, or maybe like a year or so in. And I said, "Hey, you know what? Like, I totally get where you're coming from. I understand that's a really, really important thing." And he said, "I'm paying this lady and all this money." And so I was like, "Okay, well, let's can I just look up her site?" And so we looked up her site, and I was like, "Hey, I don't know another way to say this, but if she's gonna consult you on something, ironically, then I feel like she should be practicing what she preaches, but like I
Mm.
can't find her anywhere." And I think the light bulb
Yes.
for him went off where he was like, between the me pointing out the problem in that credibility and also just not selling him.
Yeah. You're just genuinely like being a good Samaritan, being like, I think that you could, do X, Y, or Z to improve your business. Like, have a good day.
And so he just asked me, he said, "If you were in my shoes, what would you do?" And I was like, "Oh, I think I would go about it this way, XYZ." And he had said, "Great. And so that's what we're going to do.
Oh,
Why don't you draft up a contract and meet me next week when we'll have a meeting?" And I said,
wow.
"Okay." And it's funny, like I feel, and we'll probably get to this later in the podcast, but I feel like there's like themes in my life that just kind of deja vu, like they
Mhm.
repeat themselves. You never know it until later on. But this was one of those moments for me that I've seen over and over again where I'm like half like to the moon excited, like, "Oh my gosh, so this is happening." And the other half of me is like imposter syndrome. Like, "Oh my gosh, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, oh my gosh." Like, am I going to be able to do this? I don't know what I'm doing.
Right.
What the heck's happening?
Right.
So
Like you showed up to work on computers and you're leaving as like a marketing consultant and you're like, I don't know how to do what I said I was going to do.
I literally was like, "I'm going to make a couple $100 today and make sure we have groceries for a little bit." And I was like, "Oh, now I have a business. This is how life works."
That's so, I feel like unusual in terms of the entrepreneurial experience. I feel most people like they have an idea and then they spend a few months like testing it, like seeing how it's going to work, thinking, and then making a website is usually like the next big thing that they do. But for you, like it really just fell into your lap.
It, so in a way, it did fall into my lap. But I think if I'm going to make a connection that hopefully, the audience can kind of really like stew in, I think so many times, especially in our culture, there's just so many resources, right? There's so many
Mm.
incredible podcasts and books. And I had been, whether it was Twitter at the time or, throwing myself in books, listening to whatever, I had educated myself on like, "Oh, this is definitely the first 6 things I would do as an entrepreneur." I
Mm.
just was not taking action. And
Yeah.
so when I was forced into a moment of action, which, again, I wouldn't have chosen to hit 2 horses, probably 10 out of 10 wouldn't choose that method again. Um, when I was forced into that, then I actually already had the knowledge to say, well, I'm forced into this. Let's do this. And I think
Yeah.
that for so many of us, we know, like, okay, if I go on social media and I post, right, for you at the podcast, if I just am regular at this, I will find some modicum of success. The disconnect is often in the action side. And so I was forced into action, and I already kind of had the knowledge that I'd been learning. So I'm like, well, we're just going to apply this. And I think
Yeah.
that for me, in telling people, I'm like, yo, just move, just start doing something. And yes, you'll learn on the fly, but the action part is where I really want to see people just kind of step out and just take that first step.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. About a year ago, I was fun employed and looking for something like more stable and full time. And during that period of time, I obviously wasn't just like hanging out at home. I was teaching myself as much as I could about social media marketing and how to sort of like create your own personal brand, like that kind of stuff I was really interested in. And I was just reading as much as I could because I had nothing else to do. And I was like, I wanted to learn for myself because I think I knew eventually I would do something in this sphere. But it's crazy how much is available out there. And especially when you start really narrowing down on a topic, like you'll start to hear the same things over and over again. And inevitably, it'll just stick with you. And then when I started my current 9 to 5, I've been helping our marketing team grow. It's just one person right now because I work for a startup. But talking to her has been such an interesting experience because everything that she's saying, like even if I don't necessarily understand the industry lingo or the, niche marketing terms here and there, like I understand what she's saying. I understand the high level because I think I'd spent so much time researching and understanding it from like a fundamental level that at this point in time, like it is 2024, anybody can teach themselves just about anything.
Totally. And this probably goes back to the story, but I feel like my awful sales pitch that landed me my first client, I'm still a few businesses later now still have terrible sales pitches. Like my sales pitch these days is, I told someone the other day who was interested in being a client, I'm like, just so you know, I'm not an expert. Like if you think that I'm going to come in and save your business and be the lifeline, like this is not a good fit.
Yeah.
You're the expert. I'm coming in as the coach. It's my job to bring the best out of you. Because at the end of the day, like you can go listen to all the podcasts. There's so much free stuff out there that will change your life and help set you up. What you're paying me for, and the reason why you want me, is to help you mentally zoom out, see everything for what it is, and bring the accountability that says, hey, this is where you said you want to go. So this is how we start, and this is where we're going. That's the hard part. That's the part you're not going to get, right? The person who's doing the podcast, right? The Tony Robbins isn't coming out of your computer screen to be like, hey, Maddie, really need you to pick it up today. And so, yeah, I think that's been the biggest thing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think when it comes to entrepreneurs specifically, there's like two things I find that anybody who's struggling as an entrepreneur has. It's like either you are stuck in what I call survival mode, where you're just trying to like get the business off the ground and keep it going so it stays alive, which at that point you're so deep in the weeds that you can't actually see what's going on at a high level. Or also they have like issues with namely accountability. Like they just have all these ideas that they can't execute, especially like visionary types, I think have issues with like small detail oriented execution.
Totally. Yeah.
So we've seen it all the time.
Yeah, honestly, you just summed up probably, I'd say 80% of my clients, right? That I hear, doesn't matter what vertical they're in. I work with business owners, entrepreneurs, and high performing leaders, and variety of industries. I'm working with people that are anything from a few $100,000 to I've got clients who do 8 figures, and it's honestly the same problems. People say, "Man, I'm stuck," and they don't know how to get unstuck, right? I am drowning in the day to day because I'm an operator, but I'm also the owner. What do I do? And for a lot of people, and you hinted at this, it's paralysis, right? For me, I'm forever an eternal optimist. So I see a blank canvas and I'm like, the world's our oyster. What are we going to do
Yeah.
today?
Yeah.
Right. And it never really clicked for me. I mean, it did at post accident, but it never really clicked for me that for a lot of people, they look at a blank canvas and they get paralyzed. Like, oh my gosh, where do I start?
Yeah.
Right? Do I put the brush here? Do I put the right? And so it's so interesting because the problems get magnified as your like revenue and your sales grow. But at the end of the day, truthfully, they are the same problems that I
Yeah.
think we all go struggle with, and they all play on the same fears that we all struggle with.
What is the advice that you give people who are experiencing like the paralysis of getting started?
Yeah, man, that's such a good question. Obviously, like the easy and cliche thing is to say, just get started. But
Yeah.
I've come to really, because part of my business, and it's really interesting because I didn't even set up to be a business coach. Again, it feels like this accidental thing just repeats itself.
Yeah.
But, but because if I'm honest, I just felt like I'm like, there's a million coaches out there, and I'm like getting these ads, and I'm like, I don't even believe half of these people straight up. I'm like,
Right. No, totally.
what is this? Let's cut through this fluff. And so for me, I had said, look, obviously, what I bring is a value. I learned very quickly that I fit like a really specific um, niche in the industry. But because of that, I'm highly relational. Like
Mm.
if you and I are going to do business together, I'm like, yo, Maddie, we have to build relational currency. If you win, I win.
Yeah.
And so part of that is instead of just telling people, hey, you need to act. One of the biggest things I do is I act as an advocate, right? Where I'm like, okay, can we explore the fear behind that? Can we
Mm.
explore why you actually feel that way? Uh, and because that's actually going to open up so much. Like there's this, and I'll say it quickly, but there's this 3-step framework that I've really come to employ with clients. I've got 2 questions I ask people anytime that they're interested in working with me. And then once that we work together, there's 3 things we have to work through. And the first is always, okay, live in reality. So if you have paralysis, let's live in reality. And that reality is you have paralysis. You don't know where to start. Admit to yourself that things are hard, they're tough, you don't know where to go, because once you live in reality and you have a baseline, we can go from here.
Yeah.
The second thing is what I had said, where I'm like, okay, let's identify why you feel this way. Do you have paralysis because you're scared of failure? Are you scared that you're going to make the wrong decision? Right? Are you scared that you're ill equipped for the next step? Because when we figure out what your fear is, then we also figure out, wow, we should build a plan around this, right?
Yeah.
I was talking to someone the other day, and they had one of the reasons they had paralysis is they're like, I'm terrified to give up my peace of mind and my mental health to take the next step in my business. And I'm like, great. That sounds like you need boundaries in your business.
Yeah.
That
It's
sounds
simply like time management could be like your number one BFF.
right. And to go a step further in their business, I said, then maybe you need an operator. You need somebody
Mm.
to be the bridge between you and the business. So you have that peace of mind, right? Somebody
Yeah.
else that's more comfortable wearing that. And for them, that was like, oh crap. Right. But that started with identifying that fear. So it's, that first step. The second step is identifying the fear. And then the third step that I tell people to really get over the paralysis often is, let's accept that we need to be open-minded, that we need to
Hmm.
be flexible, right? You can have a goal. We all have goals. I mean, I had goals before the accident, and I still have many of those goals. But what I've recognized is what's less important is how we get there, right?
Yeah.
So if it takes a little bit longer, if it looks a little different, if it's got a different method to the madness, that's okay. And that's really hard for a lot of people because the third one really preys on our control. As
Oh,
entrepreneurs, we kind of love control, right?
of
Right?
course. That's why we
Right? Like,
start our own businesses. It's because we don't want to work for somebody else.
oh, right, like this is my baby. The amount of times that I've
Yeah.
heard that from people, even when I had my marketing company, who were like, well, no, this is my brand. This is my website. And I'm like, hey, I don't want to be this guy, but it sucks. I hate to tell you. It sucks.
Like, I'm
Um,
sorry to say,
uh,
but it's
And I'm like, also, I'm not selling you a website. I'm just telling you it sucks. I wouldn't buy this. Wouldn't come to your thing.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
No, I
So,
think there's like this is something that was really hard for me to learn was like it's twofold. There's an element of surrender where you're like, I have this goal, but frankly, I have no idea how it's gonna get there. Like I don't know how we're gonna get there. And it's not that I don't have a plan for execution that's completely separate. It's more about being open to the path not looking exactly like how you think it's going to look. So every day, I do X, Y, and Z to further my business. But at the same time, like if something is guiding like the business in a different direction, right? Like let's say, for example, for this podcast, I talk to entrepreneurs. It's very much designed to help other aspiring entrepreneurs figure out how to get their ideas off the ground, right? Whereas maybe it's leading me more towards talking about entrepreneur mindset and focusing on how we can improve entrepreneur mindset. Like if I was not the person that I am today, I would be very resistant to that because I'm like, this was the idea. I need to make the idea work, as opposed to being open-minded and saying like, this is where the people are going. This is where the conversations are naturally flowing. Like there's a reason that that's happening that I need to be open-minded to and allow for that transition to happen, because perhaps what's on the other side of that is better than if I were to keep like beating against a wall that's presenting itself.
Oh, that's so good. I feel like you need to have me on again. I'll interview you, and we'll swap roles. That's what we'll do next time.
Okay, great.
But I feel like, to riff off that, like one of the biggest things for me, and again, full disclosure, a lot of the things that I've come to realize are things that I would have laughed at in a previous life. I would have been like, yo, this is fluff. I don't need your motivational. But, there's this idea of the why behind the what. And the what, like you had said, building a podcast, building a business, I want to make $5 million, whatever it is.
Yeah.
For me, I've never had a problem with the what. I'm filled with ideas like, okay, we're going to do this. I'm going to go here. I want to travel to here.
He
The
has
why,
goals.
totally, right? Like I think what I struggled with was the why.
Mm-hmm.
So about 4 years post-accident, I was in rough shape. Like the business was like, it was not good. I had a business, but like as soon as I was getting clients, I was losing them. But I was just in shambles in my life. Like at one point I was 315 pounds.
Wow.
And yeah, my health was just in shambles. Like I was not doing well. And I remember like going up the stairs, I was like struggling to breathe, compounding everything. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, man, something's got to change. Like something has got to change. And I came to this again, living in reality. I'm like, listen, I can't change that I got into a horrific accident. I can't change the trauma that I went through. I can't even change so much of what's going on. But I wonder if I can take personal responsibility and ownership over this part of my life. And so I basically, there's this business adage that I know, it's, I can't manage what I'm not measuring. So I said, okay, I'm just going to measure the junk out of my health. Every day I'd put a number next to how I feel, next to how many steps I took, like how many, like, hey, what were the macros on this meal? And I ended up losing 150 pounds.
That's amazing.
And the success. Oh, I tell people, I'm like, I lost another person is basically like what it was.
Wow.
And I tell people, I'm like, it was for me, that was the eureka moment where I was like, if this worked here, why can't it work in my business? If this worked in my business, why can't it work in, my personal life, in my relationships, in my networking? Like, this idea that I'm like, I want to multiply and I want to manage things, but man, I don't even have any like base idea of how I'm doing, of where I'm going. And so that why behind the what, that why for me was, okay, I need to be healthy. Like I am not in a good spot. Like I remember I went to see a doctor and he's like, yeah, you have prediabetes. Like it's not looking good. And I was like,
oh shit.
And it was a bit of a scare tactic on his part. God bless him. But he was like,
you were like, it worked.
Yeah, he was like, if you want to have a family. And I was like, I just feel like, yeah. Did you ever remember the Jenna Marbles from back in the day?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, that's exactly how I felt. I was like, just like doing that face. And so anyway, for me, it was like, okay, no, you know what? I want to live to have a future family. I also want to live for my current family and for my friends. So part of my why became my health. And so for me, I've seen that kind of extrapolate. And I just try and tell people, I'm like, your why is so much better than goals, because goals has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Like when you reach the end of your goal, you have to set a new one.
Well, this was my problem. I was incredibly like accomplishments motivated, like throughout my entire life. Like my life was just a number of goals that I had hit and strived. And then I like derived all of my self-worth from how many of those I could stack up. And it was for me during the pandemic that I realized like what an empty purpose that was, like what an empty life that would be, because I was always just chasing the next thing. Like I was always like, okay, well, that's done. Like what's next? As opposed to like learning and accepting like myself and finding worth in who I am as opposed to like what I do, which I think is a very hard thing to not only just separate and understand, but also figure out then what to do after you have separated it and learned it. Especially like, I think entrepreneurs, personality wise, are obsessed with doing. Like, we're highly motivated individuals, and we have a lot of self-worth from what we build. And if you can't
Totally.
find your why outside of your business and within yourself, like you're always just going to be chasing the next thing.
Oh, yeah, you're preaching to the choir, right? Like, I'd love to sit here and be like, that's your problem. Like, I don't know. I definitely, like, I've been there, right? And I think we all have to some level, right? So one of the two questions I always ask every single person that wants to work with me, and it's a dicey question for sure, but it's this idea that I say, God forbid, if something were to happen to you and knock you out for a month, what would happen to your business? What would happen to your organization? What would happen to your idea? And almost everybody has the exact same reaction. There's like again, this like awkward like smile, kind of like nervous laughter, and then it kicks in. They're like, yeah, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have much of a business to come back to.
Truly, like I'm thinking about it and like answering it in my head, and I'm like, well, it just simply would no longer exist.
And I tell people, I'm like, I hate to say this to you, but then you don't have a business, you have a job. Because when you stop showing up to your job, you don't get paid. So let's build you a business. And it's in that moment that for a lot of people, like I get to make this dichotomy where I say, like if we're just truly altruistic about it, let's live in the reality that, the things that you love about yourself are also the things that you dislike about yourself, right? I was working with, I'm still working with them, but this operations manager at a company, because oftentimes I'll work with the owners and I'll work with the operators. That's kind of the niche that I love.
That makes perfect sense.
Right? I'm like, oh, hey, strategy and vision. And a lot of entrepreneurs are actually really good at that, but then they suck at the execution. So I can help bring in the implementation. And
you need both.
Right. And so anyways, they've built this wonderful brand. It's female led. They're crushing it. And I have a great rapport with them. I'm actually headed there for 3 days for like a in-person strategy stuff. But she's a perfectionist and she's a bit of a control freak. And that's what's made her such an incredible operations person. Because she's like, let me tell you, nothing is going undone on my watch. Like there is nothing, there's no detail in the moment. And for all the good that's brought, it's also made her a terrible delegator. Awful. Yeah. And so I was like, hey, let's live in reality together. You've gotten this far because you're so good at these things. But now I need you to be cognizant that the very things you love, that you find your identity in as an entrepreneur, as a leader, are also some of the things that are holding you back. Totally. So we have one of two options. We can either take those off your plate, or you can decide to level up and become a better entrepreneur, a better leader, and push through those things. And for her, and again, this is where I come in. I say, you can read all the books, you can listen to all the podcasts, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to be here to guide you on that journey if you want to go down that road. Yeah. So to her credit, 14 months later, here we are. She committed to the journey. She has since hired 2 managers under her. Right. The business has grown tremendously. She's delegating, and now she's like a bit obsessed. She's like, what else can I delegate? What else can I? But she's living in the reality where she's like, I don't have to identify. I don't have to be in synchronization all the time with my business. Right. We don't have to share the same identity. And I just love that she came to that reality. Right. And I think for all of us, that's like a bit of a sobering reckoning that we all have to go through.
Totally.
Right? Because it's amazing.
It's important. Like every entrepreneur eats, sleeps, and breathes their business to the point where like they are their business. And the idea of separating yourself from it sounds like impossible, and also is probably the best thing that you could do for yourself and for your business.
Totally. Right. And so again, like this is my now third iteration, so third business. And so for me, I've learned one of the first things I always want to do is I'm like, yeah, I'm going to build Matt's brand. That's great. But I'm also going to build Prime. I'm going to build my company. So the moment I could bring somebody on, the moment I added someone to the team, even though I'm only a year and a half in, I've got a few team members now. The moment I added somebody in, I was like, amazing, we're a company now. So let's build both of these, and the company is a person. It's a separate entity. And that also allows me to create, boundaries and say, well, this is how the company looks. This is how the company acts. This is how Matt looks. This is how Matt acts. And those personas, again, I highly encourage people, go down the journey of trying to create some separation. It's going to be really, really good for you, because while the business may never sleep, you need to.
I really want to dive deep into this, because I'm of the mind that I'm obviously not in a place yet where I'm growing and like hiring people. I'm like not even making money yet, but I want to be ready when that time comes. Like I want to make sure that my processes are in a good place, that the business itself is in a good place. So then that way, when I do bring another person on, it's like you said, it's like, it's easy for them just to come in and get like the ball rolling. So what are some of the exercises that you take your clients through when you want to separate entities and create like a separate persona for the business?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the first things that I tell people, and again, this works. It doesn't matter whether you're 10 million or, whether you're just starting out. I get people to do, I'm not a visual learner, but I've become visual. I find it so helpful. Like, I get people to draw out these workflows where I'm like, I want you to lay out when someone enters your company or shows an interest to when they're done with your product or service, lay it out. And when I get them to draw the visual, people who are not visual look at it and they're like, oh, but it's missing this and it's missing this and it's missing this. And I'm like, see, these are the things you would have never thought of if we were just writing random stuff down, or if I was asking you to give me like a oral dictation of what your business is.
Yeah.
And so using that train of thought, what I tell people is I say, look, take a piece of paper and write, Maddie, I want you to write every single thing that you do. Okay. And there's 3 categories. There's only 3 categories you're allowed to put things in. And those 3 categories are automation, elimination, and delegation. Okay. So of all the things that you do, what can be automated, right? What can we use? Technology, AI, all the advancements, like it's crazy what's out there, right? Even, there's apps like Zapier that I can connect 2 softwares together and it's like, it triggers automatically. What can I automate? So if we consider that you've got 100% of things on your plate's full. If I can automate 10%, man, I'm at 90. What can I delegate? Maybe I can't hire in-house, but maybe I can outsource an hour or 2 a week. Maybe I can afford that, right? Like for me, I made the decision early on when I couldn't afford people. I was like, okay, but my finances are taking up way too much of my time or my administration. So I'm just going to outsource an hour a week to a service that was like, I don't know, $100 a month. Great. So I've delegated 10% more, 10% automation, 10% delegation. Again, keeping my costs low, that's where I was. And the last step is elimination. Once I put everything down, I was like, I drew it out. I was like, man, some of this is redundant. Like, why am I doing this? Right? Like I would go in, I'd book a session with somebody who's interested, and then I would go add it to my calendar. And I'm like, wow, but if I use Calendly, it's going to add it to my calendar. And then it'll automatically add to my CRM. Right? Yeah. Here I am nerding out already. But right. And it's like, so I can actually just save 3 to 4 minutes. And people are like, that's just 3 or 4 minutes. 3 to 4 minutes across how many clients?
Yeah.
Across how many other tasks?
Yeah, that adds up fast.
10%. And so now all of a sudden I look 10%, 10%, 10%. I'm like, man, I freed up 30% of my time. That's 30% of my time that me as the owner, the entrepreneur, the leader, I should be spending on only things that I can do.
Yeah.
Right. And that's now starting to give me a roadmap of, okay, I'm starting to prepare. See this 30%? These are things I want to I can start developing processes for, SOPs, so that when you talk about being ready, when someone's ready to come on, man, here you go. Right? Nicely packaged, right? But this simple exercise can free up anywhere from 10 to 40% of people's time, I find often, for young entrepreneurs who are just starting out. Because truth is, we're all wearing like 10 million hats, right? That's just the entrepreneurial game. You're like, oh, great, I got to learn marketing and admin and accounting and all these things, and make sure that I don't get thrown in jail for doing something illegal. Like,
yeah,
right? All these things. But the truth is that there's so much out there, so much resource. There's so many different ways. I'm like obsessed with optimization that
Yes.
we can make our lives better. And
Yes.
so again, simply writing it down, putting those 3 categories, whatever's left, those are probably the things that I should be doing. And
Yeah.
so now I have what I like to call my job description as a business owner, because for some
Mm.
reason, every company has a job description for every single role except for the business owner.
Yeah.
And you sit there and you're like, well, if I don't have a job description, how am I judging success for me?
Oh my
Is it
gosh.
just based on the number in the bank account? Because if it is, we're not looking good. I mean, if it's based on that, Amazon's not looking good. They purposely run a loss every year, right? So, yeah.
That's so sorry. You honestly are just like blowing my mind right now. I've never thought about it that way. And it's so funny because you think as the business owner that your job is just to do everything. And when you realize that you don't actually have to do everything, that there's a lot of creative ways to go about it, it's almost like suddenly you're so free with time that you're also again confronted with this like, what am I? Like, do I drive the vision? Like, am I just the person who implements workflows? Like, what am I doing here?
Totally. And it's that reckoning that I think is, listen, like, I think we all go through it, and we go through it often. And I think hopefully we just get better at handling it. Like, there's this leadership adage, and it's not your job to do everything, but it is your job to make sure everything gets done. And I think that that's the truth for every entrepreneur. And so, like you said, you go through this process. You're like, okay, I followed that advice Matt said. And now you have this like identity crisis. You're like, oh crap, like, sure, my time is free, but like, what the heck do I do next?
Yeah.
And now you have an opportunity. You have an opportunity to add more things to your plate and say, well, I'm going to try this. And they're like, oh, I don't like this at all. Well,
Yeah.
now you're starting to learn what the things you like in business and the things you don't like. And oftentimes that's actually great motivation. Like when I would go through this exercise, I would start to add things to my plate, and I'm like, yo, I do not want to touch anything administrative again for the rest of my life. Please.
Yeah.
Like if I could just hire someone to just follow me around, that would be the dream. Okay. like just can't. The other day I was filling out a form. I think it was like a passport renewal. And I was like, I don't think I own a pen. I was like, this is both shocking and partially embarrassing. Like, I don't think I'm that allergic to administration that I don't own a pen. But
I love that. I'm a big believer. Like, whenever I have time that's just like not dedicated to the weekly maintenance of like the podcast, I like to set aside time for like thinking time. I think entrepreneurs, like, we need to think a lot. And that's, I think, where a lot of my creativity comes from, and figuring out what's the next step for me. Like, what is another good step? What should I be doing? Should I be partnering? Like, how can I keep things moving to the next level? And I always just call it like thinking time. But as the visionary, that's truly what I'm here to do, is set
totally.
the vibe, set the goals, like think about where we're going to be, where I want us to be in the future. And then inevitably I'll get to executing that, but I can't get to that point if I'm just drowning in daily tasks.
Totally. Right. And oh man, it's so good. And I think there's this distinction that people need to make. There's working in the business, which is doing all this stuff, and there's working on the business, which is what you said, right? And that's why I encourage people like this, that exercise of writing things down, automation, elimination, delegation. This is not a one-time thing. Like if you do this every, month, let's say, you're going to start to realize, okay, there's things that are not coming off from this list that I have to do. And for most business owners, that's, man, I have to cast vision, because even if I'm the only person here, if I don't do it, nobody else is going to do it.
Yeah.
Right. I have to. And so I often tell people, and again, it can shift, but as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, as a high performer, there's generally 3 things that are your responsibility and that you want to make sure you're doing. Right. And it's like, you want to be the one giving vision. You want to, and you're the strategy, you're bringing out, you're saying, this is where we're going to go. I don't know how we're going to get there, but this is where we want to go. The second thing is leadership, right? It's like, hey, I'm going to be the one, the buck stops with me. I'm the one who's going to take ultimate responsibility. So I'm going to say, we should hire, we should bring people on, we should make these decisions. And the last thing, and I think one that people are resistant to, depending on their personalities, but you got to be somewhat of a face. And maybe that's not you being an influencer on Instagram, but maybe that's you just being present, networking and
Yeah.
getting out there. Because if you don't do it, like you could hire someone to do sales, but nobody's going to do it the way that you do it, right?
Nobody knows your business and is as passionate about it as you are, and therefore you are, without a doubt, the best salesperson that you will ever have.
Totally. And so, it's the whole 80-20 rule. Like when you look at your list, as you keep going through it, you're going to start to realize, wow, 20% of the things I do are probably adding up to 80% of my success.
Yeah.
So what am I doing with that other 80% of my time? Right.
I feel
And
like I need to do this for myself because I know that there are some high value things that I do and a buttload of low value things that I do on a regular basis that I almost certainly could outsource to somebody else. And I can see that this is like an incredible tool for people. And I think what I'm coming to really learn and appreciate about the way that you do business is that you're not here to tell them necessarily what to do, but you're more helping them understand themselves better and understand their current positions better. And then being like, here's where you want to go. And now that you see how you sort of get them to see clarity almost.
totally, going forward, you're going to do all my sales pitches. I've decided. You're hired.
Perfect.
No, that's exactly it. And that's why my pitch is, look, I'm not the expert, right? Like
Yeah.
what I aspire to do for entrepreneurs is I want them to feel so empowered because they're in their field. They know their competitors.
Yeah.
They know, right? Like they know exactly what's happening. You know about podcasting. I don't. I'm new to this. Like I have no idea. And so I want to empower you. I want to empower the owner to feel so inspired and so ready to go that they have all the information in front of them to say, I'm going to go in this direction, right? I'm going to go this way. And so it's not about, I don't have to be an expert. I was talking to somebody who was, wanted to be a client, and they're a fairly large interior design firm. And they're like, well, how can we trust, the interior design industry? And I was like, I don't. So sorry to burst your bubble. Like, I have no idea. I mean, I like interior design, but don't know much. I'm like,
Yeah.
but what I do know is I know people and I know business. And if I can get to help you find the inefficiencies and the things that are bogging you down and things that are holding you back and bring you extreme clarity and extreme responsibility and ownership, then you're going to feel empowered to keep going. And
Yeah.
I'm a big sports guy. And so I just love to use the analogy that I'm like, the coach doesn't play the game. No one cares if the coach ever played the game. Like, sure, maybe that feels nice. Like, oh, I've done this before. It's the coach's job to bring out the best out of everybody on that field. They're not throwing the basketball in the net. They're not shooting the puck into the net. They're just creating a framework for the people that do that to be at their best. And they'll
Yeah.
implement systems and strategies, but they're just there to make sure that the people who do that and are good at that do it the best.
Yeah. And on top of that, they're able to see all of the pieces on the board. They are able to see all the players at the same time from both teams. And then they can make decisions based off of that, like from an almost like a step back perspective, as opposed to the players who are each individually playing their role, but the coach is sort of like helping them work together as a team.
Totally. And that's why the relational aspect for me is so huge, because I'm building relational currency with you. And, that's important to me. It's just more fun, straight up. But also, when I come to bring harsh news, which I need to sometimes, where I say, hey, love this. Your website sucks. Let's move on. And I drop that information. People understand. They're like, well, he has no skin in the game. He's not trying to sell us a new website. He's not here he's actually just saying, guys, I would not buy this. And I don't think other people would. So can we re-examine and reframe how we're going about this? And that kind of advice is really, really hard internally, right? You're working in marketing, you could bring something and it could be the best advice, but there could be biases and people who are like, well, you know what? I oversaw the budget that made that decision, or I really like this. And you're like, it's not about what you like. It's about, here's where we said we want to be and here's where we are. How do we get there? So
I also feel I want to know So do you look at their business across all of the different disciplines, or do you specifically focus more towards on, like, I don't want to say marketing because it's not that niche, but is it systems, processes, or is it across like a wider range of things?
It's everything.
Mm.
It is the entire business. And that sounds like a lot, and it is. But to me, what we do, and that's why that first little bit is so important. So I work as a business coach, I work with the owners to, again, all the strategy, the vision, that, like, what do we need to optimize? And I work with the operators and the management teams as a consultant to implement and do these things. But at the end of the day, when we drop the entire chart and I figure out exactly how the business runs, what's working, we start with what's the most leveraging. We can't work on all 10. I can't do HR, admin, finance, marketing, sales all one shot. So what's the most leveraging? What's the thing that's going to get us moving further? Again, 80-20 rule, right? And so people will say, oh, it's sales, or oh, it's HR. Great. We'll start there. We'll identify 2 or 3. Let's start here. And we'll slowly work our way as I build trust. I always tell people, I'm like, within the first 6 months, I want the difference in your balance sheet to quantify why you hired me.
Yeah.
I don't want this to just be a good feel good, like, oh, well, it feels like Matt's impacting. No, I want it to be tangible.
Totally.
And so by doing this, because truthfully, we can always optimize, we can always get more efficient, we can always get more effective, and people want to grow. And so I think it's important that we look at the entire business. One of the best things that I tell people, one of the first things we always start with is, I'm like, draw me up an org chart. And I don't want an org chart. I would even say to you, I'd say solopreneurs, drop an org chart. An org chart is not about vice president of whatever. I don't care about the titles. The org chart should represent every single aspect of my business. In fact, if I can't map out my whole business in an org chart, there's probably something wrong with my business and how I designed it. And so that org chart actually gives us a framework for every single responsibility sits in this org chart. Now I can draw clear lines along the responsibilities. And I'm like, okay, great. Now I know how I need to divide my business, who I need to hire, what I need to outsource, because everything fits in that org chart. And once we do that, it's honestly amazing. I talk to clients all the time where 2 weeks after we design an org chart, they're like, oh, we forgot about this. Oh, we forgot about this. And I'm like, oh, you forgot about that? How's that part of the business? And almost always they're like, oh yeah, it's kind of neglected. No, duh, it's neglected. You didn't put it on the org chart, right?
It's neglected.
But again, that's exactly why, right? It's neglected because it actually doesn't sit on the org chart, which means it doesn't have a job description. It doesn't have someone accountable, holding it accountable. It doesn't probably lack systems. And it probably lacks a process because it didn't sit on the org chart. It all flows from there.
That's so interesting. And I love that it really took you going through your own personal journey of getting yourself together, mentally, physically, emotionally, in order for you now to be in a place where you can empower other business owners to be the best versions of themselves, so then their businesses can be the best versions.
Man, like I have to remind people often, I'm not naturally wired this way. Like, I am A-type, dreamer, builder. I was the guy for a long time. Like, if you told me details, I'd be like, please, like, remind me of the tough cups. Like, but I had to learn these things because I had to survive. Right? As in my marketing business for those first years, as soon as I would add a client, I would lose a client because I'd get knocked out for sometimes 2-3 weeks at a time. And who's responding to those emails? Who's moving the work forward? Right? Like, who's sending the invoice to get paid? Or who's paying the bills? And so I actually had to sit myself down and say, what do I need to do to survive? What do I need to build? And that survival, I eventually moved from surviving to thriving solely because I started putting those things in place. And so now, again, comes full circle. I sit here not telling people good ideas. I'm sitting here because I'm like, yo, this has worked. I've seen it work across 3 businesses. This will change your life if you commit to it. And it's not about a personality, because trust me, my personality is not wired that way. But if you batten down the hatchets and commit to this, no matter where you are in your business journey, it's going to be super helpful.
I think that's the perfect place to close. I think you really summed everything up, and it gives people such a great starting point if they're listening to this and they're like struggling and they don't know what to do next, I think it's the perfect place for them to start. So thank you so much. This was such a fun conversation and I really enjoyed it.
Oh, thanks for having me. It felt like we were just like sitting on a couch having a conversation.
Totally.